You're going to start off, in fact, with David Cameron grilling from MPs.
I am, because that's what's on the front page of the papers. Of course, he made one probably significant admission in his evidence to MPs yesterday, which is that he did discuss the B-Sky-B deal while his government were discussing whether or not to approve it with executives from News Corp at social occasions. So that makes the front pages. The Guardian has Cameron spoke to Murdoch executives about B-Sky-B bid, and the Independent, rather more interrogatingly, what did PM tell Murdoch about the B-Sky-B takeover? Let's have a look at the editorial in there, which is pretty damning. It's headlined, Cameron's immaturity lies exposed. They say the Prime Minister is now under fire, not only for his friendships with News Corp executives and for his involvement in the B-Sky-B deal and for choosing Andy Coulson, but also for his management of the last 3 weeks of crisis, which they say, you know, he's been strikingly evasive. There must be more revelations to come. They point out there was an allegation made yesterday by a Labour MP that senior civil servants might have had their phones hacked by people linked to Andy Coulson in the run-up to the last election, which means that the Tory election campaign could have got hold of information about their Labour rivals through phone hacking means, which would, of course, be very explosive. The Independent concludes in its editorial that Cameron's treatment of the crisis proves he's not a fully formed political leader. They say his political strategy is derivative and he looks immature. If he's to survive this crisis, the Independent says he needs to grow up quickly.
Strong words there. Another really strong story that we've been covering here on France 24, of course, the famine in Somalia. The Guardian saying the conventional wisdom of how to kind of deal with the famine is fatally flawed.
Yes, they say food aid is needed desperately, but that's just not the whole answer. They say Western powers must send food aid, but the disaster will repeat itself unless we understand the underlying causes. They pick out three main ways in which traditional agriculture in the Horn of Africa has been destroyed by the modern world. Firstly, climate change, which is making these droughts more and more frequent. Then the commercialisation of the land that was once used by subsistence farmers there. It's been bought up by big international agricultural conglomerates, often producing food for China or the Middle East, and that means the subsistence farmers have nowhere to grow their food. And thirdly, the rising demand for biofuels, which means that cereal prices around the world have soared because more and more of the cereal crop, especially in the US, is being turned into biofuels as the oil price rises. So the Guardian says it's just not enough to send money to the starving people in Somalia. We need to address these important issues which cause these disasters, otherwise they will just keep repeating themselves.
Going to try and get through three more. The first one is US debt.
Yes, well, let's have a look at the Huffington Post. You might have heard, I'm sure you've had in your bulletin, that there's been a possible solution touted by a group calling themselves the Gang of Six. It's some Democrat and Republican senators who are proposing a mix of tax cuts and tax rises, and spending cuts in order to reach a kind of compromise. But the Huffington Post says it's just pointless because even if they reach a compromise now, they're just deferring economic disaster into the future because the US deficit is so huge. So they say they really need to change the way the US economy works and especially raise taxes on the richest.
Briefly, one completely off the agenda in the Irish Times, the Prime Minister making a speech there.
Yes, this isn't something we've covered a lot in the bulletin, but is actually quite important. The front page of the Irish Times today, this is about the Cloyne report into clerical child sex abuse that was published this week, was a bit overshadowed on the international stage, but is important because it's the first report to show that the Vatican deliberately covered up sex abuse. Now, the Irish Prime Minister, Enda Kenny, made an incredibly strongly worded speech about this in Parliament yesterday, which the Irish Times says the country is reeling in shock at the breaking of a taboo because he so virulently attacked the behaviour of the Vatican. But the paper also says that's obviously gone down well with the Irish public because his popularity ratings are the highest for any Prime Minister in 9 years.
And you've got 15 seconds to tell us about the last story, a statue of Marilyn Monroe.
This is in Chicago. The local paper, the Chicago Sun-Times, very upset about it. It's of that famous scene in The 7-Year Itch where her skirt blows up over a grate. It's a 26-foot-high statue in the centre of Chicago, and the local papers there say it's vulgar and sexist and they want it removed.
Brilliantly summed up. All right, Elena, well done. That's Elena here with the international papers every day here on France 24. Headlines then, is it going to be the end of a Greek tragedy?